and here firsthand is an opportunity to translate research to practice. And the team that we've got, by context, we obviously are doing this work in the next education workforce, team-based models. And a year ago we had 8 people on the team. Now we've got 30 people on the team. We've continued to land big grants, and lots of folk are interested in this work, both in the funding sector and in school systems across the country. And never is doing responsible research in our world more important than right now. We have the opportunity to get things right, and continue to iterate and learn. And so I present to you very quickly all of the next education, not all of, a fraction of the next education workforce team. And we've got people here ranging from, for example, Estrada, who joined the team literally 2-3 weeks ago, former principal, and now supporting schools locally, and maybe at some point nationally, maybe at some point internationally, to Liam Honigsberg, who is a bit of a psychometrician himself, and is excited to be here, bringing all of his talents as a director of national networks. Right. And we've got Claire Shaner, who's also sitting on our research and outcomes squad, that's helping to make sure all these data sets actually hang together, and that we're meeting our grant outcomes, and that we're learning and developing as a team. There's we could get into all the people, we won't, because we're here to hear from you. And I should also, I guess, formally introduce myself. Brett Madden, Executive Director of the Next Education Workforce team, and proud to be with this whole cast of characters. Natalie, I want to pass over to you, I think, as a person that helped to bring us together. Of course, we know that Natalie is transitioning to another role within the university. I think our last day is officially tomorrow. We will FET you appropriately next Thursday night, so we don't need to even spend any breath on that right now. But in one of your last acts here as a leader on this team, Natalie, you want to frame up this conversation for us today, and then we'll get going.
Sure. So just a brief shout out to the whole school model team who helped make all of this data collection possible, the data that they, Ed and Audrey, were able to work through and sort through and make sense of, and all the things. I did put in the chat a link to just some running notes where I'll be taking sort of just high level notes there. If you have questions during Ed or Audrey's presentation, feel free to just put them in the chat or put them in the doc. And then at the end, towards the end, when we have 5 or 10 minutes left, we'll bring the questions back. Ed and Audrey, unless it feels like super, important moment to ask a question in the middle of the conversation, we can do even a combination of questions during and the questions at the end.
Yeah, that's certainly okay with me if when I'm chatting, if somebody has a question or wants to ask, just jump in and stop me. Otherwise, you learn pretty quickly. Somebody gives me a podium or a microphone, and I just start. I was born in 19. And I just start talking, and I'll just keep talking. Especially if something I enjoy so much as data analysis.
So Audrey, I'll lean to you to help me sort of guide the conversation. If you wouldn't mind doing that as well. So Ed, I have the PowerPoint you sent me. I'll go ahead and just share my screen if that works. Unless you want to share your screen and run it yourself.
Yeah, I have it up. I have it up and running. I was thinking I would share my screen. Perfect. And that way I'd be able to flip through things. I'm not so sure that, if we want to go through every single slide other than, but if that's okay.
Does he have sharing capabilities, Natalie?
He should. And as he's doing that, I don't know if one of your first slides, Ed and Audrey, is a quick introduction if it isn't, it'd be great to just make sure that we know who you are.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm Amrein-Beardsley. I'm a professor in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College. And Brent invited me, gosh, over a year ago to be co-principal investigator on this grant. My research expertise is in the area of teacher evaluation, particularly value-added modeling. And so that clearly aligned with this grant when we first submitted it, and also the second version that we recently submitted, in terms of rethinking and reconceptualizing and redefining the way that we evaluate teachers, instead of in silos, but also in teams. And so I was intrigued by this project. So of course I signed on, and I worked also, I think, with Deidre, right? On the actual instrument. Yes, hello, you're there. I thought I recognized you.
Not with me. I thought you were gonna say for a minute
Oh,
that you
okay.
had presented at Summit, not with me.
Okay. Well, I
It
worked
must
with
be my
multiple people.
doppelganger.
Yes, multiple people, Casey. Okay, multiple
Yes, it was
people
Casey.
and different iterations of the instrument. And so, but the main goal of doing this also, which Natalie and Brent and I discussed from the get-go, was to conduct a validation study. And so oftentimes these instruments are used and they're never validated, and then they become used more often, and then they're used for consequential decision-making purposes like merit pay, sometimes teacher promotion, sometimes teacher termination. And so I wanted to make sure, as part of my membership on this grant and my role in this grant, to make sure that we had a validated instrument also to inform such decisions when they came into play. I've also been involved in a good amount of lawsuits across other states, not Arizona, thanks to our efforts, hopefully, that, in terms of especially merit pay and wrongful termination when these things come up. And so I wanted to be proactive on this one. And also just because it's an exciting idea to reframe the way that we think about evaluating teachers, especially when they're working and collaborating together. So Ed was one of my formal doctoral students. He got his EDD through our college, gosh, Ed, 10 years ago, I forget. And so, but Ed and I actually, we met on a Department of Education assessment, testing and assessment board. And I think that was under Tom Horn's first round as the superintendent. And so we've known each other for a long time. Anyways, Ed is probably the most brilliant psychometrician and statistician and also econometrician that I know. So we collaborate quite often. So I invited him to do this work that we're going to hear about today. Any questions so far? All right, Ed, I think that's for you, and you can share your screen hopefully at this point.
Okay, it's nice to meet everybody. It was fun to be invited to work on the project. For a data analyst, it's always fun to get a brand new data set that you know nothing about, weren't involved in the creation, and you just have it just sort of bare in front of you, and you say what is the data story going to come out of this adventure? And so I totally enjoyed it. I will share my screen. Well, just to give you a little bit of backdrop, 38 years in public education as a researcher, statistician, assessment person with public schools and the Department of Education, had done my undergraduate and master's degree in economics and econometrics, and then my doctoral degree at ASU EDD program, focusing on research methods, quantitative and qualitative methods. I was kind of an odd duck in the EDD program, coming from that background, not being a teacher, not being on that track. So I've totally enjoyed the journey. I'm supposed to be retired. I'm really bad at it. So just take note for all you young people that I can see in the pictures here. Yeah, don't be me when you get, to retire. Actually retire sometime. And anyway, so it was quite fun. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see.
And Ed, I'll help. Sorry, Ed, to interrupt. I'll help with the time management. So I think she said maybe 15 minutes at the end. So you have maybe about a half-hour presentation. So
yeah, I'm thinking maybe even that.
Okay, cool.
I don't want to go too much into the weeds. Okay, so now I've got a problem. I've got two screens. Which screen do you see?
Both of them.
You see,
We see the presenter mode, I think, not the single slide.
where would I do that?
And the slideshow.
And I'm gonna end
You
the
just put
slideshow.
right there.
Uh,
And then,
I just do it from here.
Yeah,
It's-
unless you got a lot
oh,
of
there you go.
animations.
right,
this-
okay.
Well,
so-
I can do it from here. Yeah, I guess that would be fine, wouldn't it? I don't need to do it from the presenter. I've got two screens. I'm at my office at the school district I'm currently doing some work at right now like that. All right, so the last slide that we have in here is the recommendations. I don't know if you've all read the report. So it might be useful, I'm thinking, to spend a few minutes at the very beginning rather than starting into just the raw data things about how we got to these. And so we've made a couple of recommendations after I've spent time working in the data set and looking through it. The first thing that I did notice when we started the whole project is we had a 22-item survey or instrument, and we had 52 responses on it. And that gives a response to item ratio of about 2.36, which for moving into more robust factor analytic, whether it's CFA or EFA, doing even Roche-based IRT type item analysis and scale dimensionality and all that kind of thing. That ratio, the RIR, call it, is very low for that. So I knew that there was going to be some error in this or noise in this data that is going to limit how much inference I'm going to make on whether the dimensions, meaning the 8 constructs that are in the instrument, are they well defined? Are they not well defined? I think it becomes problematic given the data set and the way it stands right now to do deep work in that and come up with good inferences on what the psychometrics are going to say with it. There's 3 to 5. There's out of the 8 constructs, only 3 of the constructs had 4 items. Every other construct had 2 items. So I knew right away that exploring constructs with only 2 items on it in various psychometric methods is going to be problematic, right? You're not going to be able to come up with good inferential judgments that say, this construct is well defined or it's not well defined. We really would want to have 3 to 5 items for each of the main constructs, and there are 8 in this positive structure. So we have some limitations going on right away, I knew at the beginning with it. Then the data clustering question, which I'll have some slides on. Some of the responses are representing the views of multiple team members, but not all team members are responding within the cluster. Then we have representations that are clustered within a campus, and some campuses have considerable representation in the database, while others do not. So there is a hierarchical clustering issue that is going on. And I'll speak about that. So we're making some recommendations to improve the quality of the field test or pilot test data from which to extend the work on the scales and the dimensionality of the subscales with that. So we're recommending expanding that, and we'll come back to that. Then we'll have a recommendation at the end of possibly doing a law sheet-based content validity index as an addition to the validity dimensions that have already been done with focus groups and getting feedback from participants with that. And underlying all of this is that original one, the limited data set, the 52 responses to the 22 items on it. And if we can expand that, the data set from the participants in the study, the members of the next team activity, it's going to open up more robust and more exacting analysis of the scales and the dimensions in the instrument. It's going to provide better evidence of whether the dimensions need to be adjusted, questioned, collapsed, expanded, reduced, that kind of thing, simply because the field test data will better support some more robust methods to apply to it, if that makes any sense at all. With that, so we start off with, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, can we go back to slide 14, please?
Yes.
Just there are some like kind of complicated terms here. I just wanted to ask if anybody had any questions so far. Ed had mentioned EFA, and you're going to hear about that. That's called an exploratory factor analysis. He mentioned CFA, that's a confirmatory factor analysis. So that's kind of where, and Ed will talk about this, where you confirm what you believe your instrument is doing. That's CFA. And EFA is exploring, like, you've got these items, what are they actually doing? And so you're exploring how the items are holding together. And I also wanted to note under the third bullet, limited construct scale representation. So what a construct is basically like the main sections of any instrument, really, with the items underneath. So something might be like classroom management. And then you might have, in terms of the recommendation, 3 to 5 items under that section. But in survey research and in psychometrics, we call those constructs. And so just to have everybody on the same page, especially because I think Ed's going to be talking more about constructs and construct validity. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any other questions about terminology, or are we good? Good?
And,
okay.
yeah,
And I should also add that there's a chat going on, Ed, as you're talking. And so I'm answering questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to continue with the chat, and I can do that while Ed is talking.
Yeah, the way I have my screen set up right now, I don't see the chat, and I don't see all the faces of everybody in the meeting. That's kind of why I'm like looking over to one side. Excuse me. With that, so please speak up, unmute your mic if you have a question, or I'm saying things that are just, not making any sense or whatever.
And so let me ask a question that you're probably going to answer. This is Lisa White. You're probably going to answer this. So I'm going to like log this question and not drop it in the chat. I'm curious about the degree, like if we have a lot more responses, but we haven't shifted the constructs, if that's in any way helpful to validation, or if the constructs are as important as multiple responses. I have a guess about what you're going to say about that, and maybe you're going to go into that. So just logging that question for us to maybe come back around to.
Yeah, great question. So, I'm torn by making too, as you can tell, I'm going to be torn by making too much of a statement of the quality of the constructs that are stated for the instrument, right, based upon this data set. So I'm not going to be making comments that say, I think this construct is well-defined, is not well-defined, because of the issues in our recommendations with the fundamental pilot study as it currently stands on it. So I think the absolute bottom line for doing additional psychometrics on the validity aspect of the instrument as it stands is that we need to expand the data set that we're collecting. we're not making a recommendation to change the instrument right now at all, as you'll find in the report. What we're making recommendations on is expanding the data set and then applying more robust measures that are going to provide a better understanding of the current structure, and then lead us to saying these items might be collapsed, these items may be redundant, these constructs really, instead of 8, there seem to be 3 or there seem to be 4. Or you might want to revisit in a sort of a validity sense from subject matter experts. What's the definition? What's the construct operational definition? Because the data doesn't seem to be supporting that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. So my layperson's interpretation is like, before we start messing around with it, give it to a whole bunch more people.
Yes. Yes.
Great. Great.
Yeah.
Keep rolling. Awesome. That's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing how other people can summarize what I'm thinking in a much more succinct way. Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Understanding. Perfect.
Yeah. So we have 22 items on it, if I get this right, 22 items. I should start off to say this is the data from the phase 3 pilot. And I think you've had previous pilots in data collections. You've also had focus groups. You've also reached out to people in your community on constructing and defining the constructs that are included on the instrument. You've had feedback, I understand, from Natalie on the rubrics that you're using and how they're written. So you've done a lot of this good thinking work that led you to sort of format this instrument the way it is formatted. All of that data that you have stays, and it's not being replaced with this. What we're doing here is more technical with the data set itself to examine aspects of the scales, the dimensionality, and to test from the data side whether the structure and the items are working as you intended them to work in its current form on that. So we have 4-point Likert scale. We have the beginning, developing, deepening, and thriving as the 4 points. They're coded. I recorded them as 1, 2, 3, and 4. The item analytics are not. They're not general. They're called analytic rubrics because they change a little bit from item to item to item, but they're based. The coding is based on that. So I got a good understanding of that. There's no missing data in the cells in the data, which is good. So I did not have to do any imputation on anything, or nothing was dropped out. None of the records were dropped out in the various. But again, I recognize that the RIR here is 2.36, and that immediately brings into question, don't overinterpret some of the outcomes, including the straightforward stuff like reliability and Cronbach's alpha and omega and things like that with it. So we have the 8 categories. This again, I noticed that in here, there's only 3 of the categories, A, B, and D, in the way that I codified them, have 4 items. These other have 2. You're going to see there's certain measures like McDonald's omega for reliability and scale that simply drop out because they require to have more than 2 items in order to operationally define what we quote unquote would call the dimension scale. But there are 3 that have 4 on that. So that, as soon as I got to that point, I started to have some sense of the limitations of whatever measures we're going to be doing on this. For instance, in the dynamic scales, in this part, if you have 2 items and one does a reliability check and you say, do both those 2 items correlate together? And does the scale reliability for dynamic schedules, does it get better if we change one of the items? Well, you can't do that. You can't ask that because if I drop one item, I don't have a scale anymore. And so it just drops out. So you can't do that kind of thinking on it. One can look at the correlations between small numbers of items and say, do they hang together? You know, if these two things are measuring this dimension called dynamics schedules, you'd think that the correlation between two items should be pretty high. You know, if it's 0.9, then it's redundant, but if it's 0.6, 7, or 8, then you're thinking that it's measuring the same thing called unidimensionality, single dimension. And if it's below 0.6 or things, then you might question whether those two items are actually, you know, hanging on this subscale or this concept, if that makes any sense to people. So there's some things we can do with it, but there's limitations to other things on this, like with how we do these things. All right. So here's the response representations and this issue of clustering. So I haven't gotten into doing anything with the data. I'm just exploring the data to see what the qualities of it are. And it immediately came out that we have, you know, in the elementary school side, 42% of the observations and the records are from a single school. And that Stevenson Elementary represents 25% of all the 52 observations. And then we have others like, so it says 10%. Oh, sorry. I'm in presenter mode. And I do have to move things because I have my webcam is down low, and so I propped it up so it's not looking up at me. So I might be moving my head around. But at the bottom of here, we look and we see some other large concentrations. 17% of all the observations are from Smith, 10% from Rhodes. So we clearly have clustering going on. And if you might think of the clustering in this way, it's just like student test scores clustered within a classroom, because they're in the same environment and those teachers are in the same environment, whether it's the school or whether it's the team that they're on, that if there are multiple people within that group, that those responses are going to be they're going to be somewhat correlated. They're going to be, you're not going to have random variation in the people that are on a team within a school. That just like kids' test scores in a classroom are correlated, people's responses on these items are going to be correlated. How much? That's what hierarchical linear modeling does. But this table right here tells me there's a clustering effect. The clustering effect probably leads to some error variance in this, in that we have these correlated responses on the instrument, and that immediately tells me that there's going to be some issues going on with the accuracy or the precision of the information that we're going to get when we start to do scale reliabilities and things like that. All right, so we definitely have a clustering effect that's going on, that the 52 responses, because they're clustered here, one can't really do much about right now, because there's the sample size is just simply not large enough. And when we start getting into HLM, which is hierarchical linear modeling type things, whether it be in the factor analysis approaches, even in the IRT, item response theory approaches type things, it's just not high enough. These are large sample adjustments that are being made. So again, I come back to the 52 divided by the 22 causes some inferential problems. The next thing is the team representations. So I then began, now I'm diving into the data set itself. I've gotten away from the data and I'm just looking at the data set because I'm having some issues here in needing to understand the limitations of the data set. So we have cluster representations. But in this thing, in this side, who responded, these are the measures that were in the data on the item that tells me about the team itself. And we had, for instance, 12 responses that was from one person, and that one person's response was representing the entire team. Does that make sense? So I have a team, and the team could be multiple members, but I'm not having the data from that team. I'm having the data from the one person who consulted with the team members, perhaps, and then they collectively essentially filled it out and sent it in. So I've lost that information on it. Then we have a dimension that says I have one response. There are 4 of them, one response, but they were collaborations with multiple members of the team, but not the entire team. And there was, I think I've got this labeled wrong because this says exactly the same thing, but there was one, a 5 for the total here. I'm going to have to go back and look that up because there's a slight difference in that response right there that I've mislabeled on it. But there were 5 here that come from, they come, oh, I know what it was. One response for multiple team members. Here, there were 2 responses from multiple on the same team. So I had more than one response from a team that was telling me that they were getting and submitting their results based upon the other members of the team. So I'm going, okay, well, this is causing me to think, right? We had 2 responses that came from one response where they said I had team input, not the entire team, and 33 responses that said I'm submitting my response without any team input. Is this making sense? This all goes to the integrity of the data.
This all makes sense, and those of us who do the work with schools are translating probably, I'm guessing that one response without team input was lead teacher, so just for folks on the call to know, that was on purpose. It's okay.
Yeah. And it's all good because it took me a while to realize that the purpose, I think, of the instrument is collaboration. That the purpose of this whole thing is collaboration and getting better as a team. It's a team type perspective on it, which is absolutely wonderful. And but it doesn't get us away from the need to do validation on the instrument constructs themselves. And in order to do that, in part, we do it from qualitative measures in validity by gathering information from the team participants and on the quality of the instrument. But we also do it in psychometrics from the data itself. And the data itself has to support the inferences that we're making. So this just adds another source of, I'm going to say error, but there's lots of information missing from lots of people in the data set on this. So then I looked at the teams that are by school, how many teams. We see that Smith has 6 different teams. Stevenson has 6 different teams. There are 38 teams identified in the data set. Here is the different names, teams' names. It was really a wonderful data set to work in and to explore because I know nothing about it and I'm learning as I'm doing this about it with it. Does anybody have any questions about what I'm trying to say with this and what my goal was in doing this first part? It's really, to me, it was about I have to understand the data. I have to deeply understand the data and where the limitations of the data are so that I can better interpret any of the outcomes.
Can I just ask a quick question? Thank you for all that and speaking to its characteristics. I don't think I heard you mention anything about the spread of the distribution, and it looked like about 80% of the responses were either a 2 or a 3. Is that not concerning?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. It's
All
great. Liam, hey, jump in, man. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to. I just wanted to not miss anything.
No. Any question, that's all. Yeah, so this is me not even looking very much at the data itself as in terms of a measure. I'm looking at how the measures are represented by the dimensions of the people and the groups that are submitting the measures on it. So I'm learning as I'm going through this.
And
with
just to
them.
make a meta point here, for any aspiring doctoral candidates out there or people just trying to do responsible work, please do what Ed just did. It's just so doggone important, and not enough people spend enough time actually just looking at the shape and feel of the data to understand and appreciate what it actually represents and means, as opposed to just like a bunch of numbers in a sheet, like, ugh. So thank you for your care and attention here. And let me underscore, this is a great practice and everyone should do it. Please and thank you.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. I was faculty associate for Audrey, 6 years, where we both co-taught and I taught research methods for doctoral candidates. And yeah, it's hard to get across that exploratory data analysis is an art into itself, and it's so important because it just leads you to a feeling for the data with it. So that's where I was going for this. And I stopped everything when I started to notice these things. I stopped. I said, I got to spend more time on this data to understand it and get to know it like that. Here's the slide on the distribution. So the next thing was looking at the use of the scale, and it's not a hard and fast rule. There are no statistical tests on it. It's an observation. How is the scale being used that I'm going to submit to analysis? And my conclusion was that it's center weighted, meaning that there's only 4 items on the scale. The 2 endpoints, as often happens in Likert scales, especially how the rubrics might be worded, tend to push people away from the extremes and into the center. So how the scales are being used has 2 different kind of perspectives to it. Are people pushed to the center because the way the rubrics are written on the extreme, the 2 endpoints, really prevent you from agreeing with it? And so, I mean, this is the art in writing scales, right? If you ever use the word never or always on it, and you're applying that to some social science sort of behavior type thing, are you ever, and you say, is this true in your perspective? You're going to have far few people checking off never or always, because it just life doesn't work that way with it. So if one reads rubrics really and follows them, they're less likely to do that. Rubrics at the endpoints that include a none or an always, but are qualified with something that allows the person to say, this is happening very rarely. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's rarely, or it happens frequently in a high frequency way, allows people to get to the end results. Now, I'm bringing it up because the data story here says that for many of the items, they're center weighted, where the 2 endpoints may not be near what the center points are, but it's not true for all the items. And I didn't, without other subject matter experts, I didn't begin to reflect upon your rubrics. I didn't sit there in a room by myself and say, oh, this is a good rubric, this is a bad rubric. I'm letting the data kind of tell me. So does it make sense that in the accountability statement here, that nobody chose the endpoint? That whatever this trait is on that rubric simply doesn't exist on it. or 2% or 4% of the time. I mean, this is only 52 items here. So 4% are two people indicating a 4%. So the center weighting issue I'm bringing up because this points to a closer examination of the rubrics that are defining the scale. And more specifically, it suggests taking another look at the rubrics for 1 and 4 on that, the bottom and the top, and possible improvements on it that may be causing it. But it also may be that in the trait that actually is existing for your people, that these are the proper answers, that the rubrics are very well written, and it's just that this is where the majority of those behaviors are falling. There's no answer to that question. This just says center weighted. 78% of the data is concentrated in options 2 and 3, meaning, very little. 22% is on the endpoints. One might start to look at that weighting. These are the, yeah, go ahead.
Got about 5 to 7 minutes.
Wow,
Good?
that went fast, you guys.
I know.
I told you, give me a microphone and I get it. So I'm just looking at the means here for the items. There's no difference in these means statistically. Like these don't shake out. So they're all very close together. That immediately tells me that the distinctions between the group A, the group B, the group C, the group D may not be a tenable thing as I move forward into my factor analysis, because these means are relatively, from a standard deviation point of view, they're really close together. The z-score is off here on the side for that distribution, and it's just they're clumped together. They're not spreading out. And so either everybody is clumping in on the center with the same ideas for all these different dimensions, or the dimensions are not separating. There's not a discrimination going on. That's the suggestion from just looking at this. I looked at the construct, the descriptives at the construct level. You can see the ordered means. They're all very close together. Okay, so they're all moving towards the center. I did a ANOVA and a Bonferroni adjustment to indicate on the pairwise, there's no difference in these means statistically, which again indicts the idea of construct discrimination, meaning the SR construct is identified differently than the DSG, than the FLS, and they separate. They may not be separating. This is telling me my factor analysis, I'm probably not going to get 8 of these things well defined. I looked at the item correlations. There's some very high correlations going on between the constructs. Again, indicts the idea of construct discrimination, that they're separated and they're well defined, maybe not, which I say in my comments. The individual item correlations, 10% of the items that are across all of these 8 domains, 52 or 10% have correlations above 0.5 with them. Those are high item correlations on it. I looked at the large correlation matrix for all items crossed and tried to find whether it appears, which is what confirmatory factor analysis is going to do. It's going to look at the correlation. Do they clump together well? I didn't see it. So that's leading me to some conclusions that may come out here. I looked at scale reliabilities. The scale reliabilities here should be, you want them at 0.8 within each of the domains. 0.7, some would say is okay, but that's kind of a minimum. We have a couple of item scale reliabilities with only 2 items of less than 0.7. These are 0.6s and 0.6s. You can see over here on the scale, we're about looking at individual items. Should I delete any items from the scales? Well, for the ones that I have enough items in the scale to do that question, the answer is kind of no. There's nothing that just jumps out, maybe 1 or 2, but jumps out at me. And then because there's only 2 items in many of these scales, there's a certain dimension of item reliability, scale reliability that just isn't defined. So I can't do it on it. So you can see where I'm getting with this. I did a full construct reliability on all items combined, and it's very high. It's 0.9. Compare that 0.9 to the reliabilities of the individual scales, and only the FDS 2 item 1 comes close to it. So what is this telling me? This is telling me that probably there is one big idea, one big construct that hangs together, that the items are all loading onto this big construct, single construct, that it's questionable that there's 8 individual constructs, probably not going to happen with that. It's possible that there's some 1 or 2 constructs under there, but there's a single, these items are just loading all onto a single construct. It also says, because of these, that there's probably a lot of redundancy in the items and what it's telling us. So one can think about that from a factor analysis. Sure comes out, did a ton of different modeling on this. There's really only 2 items that shake out on it. I need at least 3 heavily loaded items to define a factor, a latent factor, and I only get that with 2 latent factors. And if one looks at these shaded weightings right here to help us define what factor 1 is telling me or what it means, it's not lining up with the positive constructs that are on the instrument. So they're crossing, they're not well defined. Even this SR right here, there's 2 of the 4 items load on it, but then we have something in the DRR that loads on it. This number 3 is not a legitimate factor because there's only 2 high loading items. These are too small, means they're loading over here on these others to too high a degree. The scree plot, it's interpretation. It's another way to look at it. There's 2 definite ones with a possible third. It's not well defined with that. And then finally, the confirmatory factor analysis. The thing that comes out is that no matter what I did using the various models, the model fit statistics, the modification indices, the residual, if I tried to adjust these things, what it quickly became apparent is that in order to get these model fit data to be sufficient, and they're not, I'd have to restructure this structure, this 8 construct suggested instrument. I'd have to just essentially obliterate it and restructure it in a different way. So I didn't do it because that's not the purpose of what we're doing here. But from all of the data that we have here, this 8 structured thing from this data set, it's data set dependent at this point, is not supporting it in its current form, that more weeks needs to be doing that. More work needs to be done. Finally, if you look at the loading estimates between these 8 constructs, you can see all these lines over here. These are the sort of the correlations, the covariances between all of them. If these were high, like they are in these 3, each loading on this first SR construct, this is saying that there's not that much difference between these 4 things and this one right here, that the correlations are too high. There's too much association going on. They're not discriminating. They're not identifying this. There are some that are low, but there's only 2 items in that. And this is where we get to, can I interpret it? Right? I don't want to, I can't get blood from a stone on these things. We do have some errant things that shouldn't be happening in the data. This shouldn't be over 1. That signifies problems with the data, the structure itself. And that is, there's too many items here with only, there's too many constructs that are loading with only 2 items. There's too much correlation going on between. So did I do more work to try to eliminate that or fix it? No, because I'd have to redo all of this, and that is not the issue with it. So we get to the recommendations. The recommendations, specifically, one of the most important ones, is if we did a field test again in the fall, right? My recommendation would be to not to do it for have every individual participant complete the instrument independently. Don't use it in this field test as a collegial team building thought process exercise.
Just a question with that, Ed.
Yep.
Lisa again. Could we do both? That they respond
Yes.
and then
And I say that.
yeah. And
My
then
suggestion. Go ahead.
that n equals 110, is that the individual responses?
Yes.
And then
Um,
I'm going to ask a more complicating question, which is there any benefit in terms of validation if we have that 3 times across the year, beginning, middle, and end? So if the same team does individual and then team across the year, would that help in any way?
I'm never going to say that more data is worse than less data. So the answer is yes. It would be an interesting way to do it, especially in the report. Audrey and I suggest that if one were to do the field or use the instrument again, that you do it in 2 steps. One, do it, everybody does it individually and submits their individual responses. And then they get together and they use the instrument in the form that you want them to, that it's created for, and that is collaboration, discussion, team, right? But they do that after everybody fills it out, submits the data set, and then comes together. And then they can do the things that the next project intends them to do as team building with the instrument, but we get the data that is more independently submitted. And then if we did that throughout the year, you'd be gathering lots of data, a lot more data, in order to compare the stability of sort of the psychometric analysis from the fall to the winter to the end. So yeah, I mean, that would be a wonderful way to approach this next school year in doing it. And I don't pretend to know what the practical limitations on your side with your project
Sorry,
are
Josh.
about that.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
Well, let me add something really quickly, and Ed, disagree with me if so. I think once we have, if we had the extra data like that, once we have the instrument validated, we probably could make the case post-validation that it could go back to just being used as a team instrument. So it's not, I don't think that this means that forever this instrument has to be used individual, then team, individual, then team. But once we could get a better sense of the validity of the instrument and the constructs and how they're teasing out and holding up, then we probably could make the case that it's just a team-based instrument, which would add so much, not only to your practice, but to the field. And that would be amazing if we could get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. I concur. This is just a process of validation. Once validation gets to the point that you guys think that it's acceptable, then you use the instrument as it's intended in the project. There is one other recommendation here, though, that's important, I think, is that we need to expand the number of items from 2 to at least 3, preferably 4 for each of the constructs. Once you have that data from a psychometric standpoint, then one can get the metrics from which to say this item is redundant or this item can be removed and so forth, because you have enough data to start with in the field test. That's what the field test is kind of for. You put more out there than you might end up using in the long run, because you need enough information from which to make decisions. And your decisions could be, an item needs to be revised, or it could be an item needs to be dropped, or needs to be replaced. that all comes from the field testing and the validation study itself. In order to get to the place that you can have evidence to say the validation study that we've done adequately supports the current form of the instrument that we're using.
Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left, so maybe one more question.
Just to that point, adequately supports the current form we're using. I love how you worded that in terms of validity. If we start adjusting the deployment conditions, inviting individual responses, multiple instances over the year where there sort of embeds a pre-post component of thought to it, any of that stuff. Does the prior data still have value for future analysis, or would you treat future analysis with a new data set as its own unique group for review? I don't know if I'm making sense here.
No, I get you. Yeah. So if you did the pilot test, think about just creating a math test, for kids or something, and you do a pilot test on the items that you've written. The purpose of the pilot is to identify good, bad items, good, bad constructs, good, bad scales. And from the psychometric study, you make changes. And of course, that process has to stop at some point to where you've used the available information to in a practical limitation where you get it to a point where you say, this is what we're going to use, and we can make some claim that we have evidence that it's gone through validation. Then you gather more data as you begin to implement it in real time. And it's my personal opinion, you should be validating repeatedly, running these things through these measurements to see whether they're stable, see whether the loadings in the items are functioning well, and whether things change. I mean, populations change. I think you should continually to validate it. Once you get it to a form that you say, we've done really good work on this, this is the form that it should be, and then you use the future data sets to do quality control. Maybe you missed something or something like that. The one thing I didn't do, because it's sample size, but could be done as an exercise, is doing Roche analysis of the items and dimensionality. But that would be, if you had a larger sample size, that's the first thing I would do when I got back. I'd be taking all this data, running the CFAs, running the EFAs, and I'd be throwing the whole thing into a Roche IRT environment and doing item discriminations and unidimensionality on it. You just can't really do it with the current data. But some might argue you can, but you're so far away from you need to have a larger sample size to do it well. Did I answer your question, Liam? I think I sidestepped it. Yeah.
Thank you, Audrey, for putting your email and Ed's email into the chat. I know that some of you will mull this around and have some additional questions. So feel free to reach out to Audrey and Ed and Brent. Others, we may want to just bring them back in once we have another kind of plan of the next steps, just get their additional feedback. I put a few links in the chat and it's in the top of the running notes of their technical report of this presentation. I'll put the recording there, the survey instrument itself that was used this summer for this pilot. And if there are no other questions, we're right at time. Again, thank you, Ed and Audrey, for joining us on this journey with us, putting everything in your all of your tools to help us move this forward in its next phase.
And I just want to say to the team while we're all here, and that was it's so good, so helpful. Team on the like practical, Colleen and I are going to take next steps to propose what that might look like in terms of protocols and processes with teams. So we'll take those next steps. We work with Claire to make some adjustments to the Qualtrics. Sorry, Audrey, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was good. I was just, I had someone at the door. Natalie, did you say that you're sending out the live recording of this? I was going to attach the PowerPoint to the chat, but I didn't have the capability of that as well. Or did you say you're putting it somewhere?
Yes, I'll send you all. I have the PowerPoint in our Google folder, and I will add the recording, and then I'll send it out to everybody.
Awesome. And what I was going to say is thank you for the thank yous, but I tell you, Ed and I really, we geek out on this stuff all the time. So we thank you for sharing the opportunity, because we actually this is our fun.
Well, there's going to be a lot more fun where this came from. Seriously, we'll think about this. And are you open to us before we go and change an administration, or anything, like just to kind of quickly say yes, no, maybe so, and maybe do this instead? Are you open to that? That would, yeah. I like to fix it by design as opposed to analysis. So thank you. And Lisa Wyatt, I would just loop Liam in also. Just
sure.
to make sure, yeah, that's good. If any of the hangers on here are asking questions, rather than emailing Audrey and Ed, I think we should just log them in this this question doc, so that we don't ask the same question 12 times independently, and then we can surface a whole set of answers. Why don't we do that, Natalie? As you share it back out, if people have questions, they could just log them, and then we'll send it back.
Okay.
Cool. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Hooray. Are we meeting? No, we're not meeting. We're
No,
meeting.
when I'm the host, I like to wait to the end. I don't want people to feel like I'm kicking them out. So
Yeah, I'm meeting with
see ya.
All right. See ya. Bye.